Anyway, hi everybody. My name is Jonathan Fisher, and welcome to the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archive program for June 18th, 2025. This is the last program of our spring season, and we'll talk a little bit about the fall season here in a minute. We've had just a fantastic spring program starting out with Dale Sanders back on January 15th. With Roy Gelder, Robert Scott, and today, past PNRA board president, say that 5 times fast, Bob Kelly. And Bob will be doing a presentation on how to publish a railroad book. So just quickly, if I did in fact actually share my screen, here's kind of a recap of what we had for programming this year. Gordon, who's in the audience today, Jack Christensen's just joining us now live. A couple of the programs that Cascade Rail Foundation did on Vashon and Burien, and Roy. And then 2 weeks ago, we had Beth and Marr of Mount Rainier Scenic Railroad talking about the catastrophic fire that somebody set on their property. And we also had Robert Scott, Bob, talking about the railfan cameras in the Pacific Northwest. So I just wanted to just mention as a news item, let me do this right, Bob. Let me go from the beginning. There we go. So just as a news item, Cascade Rail Foundation, which I'm a member of, just recently moved POVA, Ponderay Valley, 5057 from Usk, Washington to Richland, Washington for restoration.
Same time,
so here is a picture of it at Usk, getting ready to leave. And here it is en route on its way from Usk to Newport, Washington. And then the next day, it's seen here going from Newport to Sandpoint, Idaho, where it was interchanged at the end.
I don't know. Just tell them that I'm going to have to sign.
Here's a picture of it at the POVA shop, or excuse me, at the Columbia Rail shop in Richland, Washington.
I will try and get on if I can.
And
but I'm having trouble. All right.
So anyway, I just wanted to just show you that quickly. Oops. And kind of jumping around here. Here's what our program looks like. I'm not sure who's talking in the background. Here's what our program looks like for this fall. Scott Lotus, CRPA, Rick Panisi, a really interesting guy. He's going to be, he could do a million different presentations, but he's going to do one on the Delaware and Hudson. L. Ron Lawrence, Gordon Glattenberg, Railroad South of the Borders, plural intended. Lots of very neat steam stuff from South and Central America. Margaret Weatherby, head of collections for Washington State Historical Society. Bob St. John, who's in the audience today on the Union Pacific and the Blue Mountains. George Hardy, switching in Seattle, and on December 10th, Robert Scott. So this weekend is the MRHA convention, Milwaukee Road Historical Association convention in Moses Lake, Washington. I won't be there because I'm going to be at my uncle's 100th birthday party in the big pavilion at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, Louisiana. And
close that door, will you?
Coming Saturday night.
Yes.
So with that in mind, let me see here. Hey, Jack Christensen, can you hear me? Jack?
You might want to mute him. You might want to give him a mute.
Yeah, but when I do that, Bob, then I don't get him back. So if I've got him, I want to grab him while I can, because this is very important. Jack, can you hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Jack, when do you turn 100 years old?
Yesterday, I guess. Today is 2 days ago, Monday.
All right.
I just started the 100-year, 99.
I know. Okay. So
don't make it any worse.
To unmute here for a second, all right?
Yeah, don't make it any worse than it is.
No, I'm not going to make it any worse than it is. But if everybody would unmute, you could join with me, and we'll 1, 2.
I really don't recommend it. So
We're going to unmute Jack, so we can sing you happy birthday.
yeah, I was
Everybody
talking to
wants
a
to join me.
buddy of mine. We've been friends since we were 12. He was a machinist on the railroad. He's going to be 100 in September. And he says, the trouble is, there's too many things wrong with me. And that's the way it is. So
I was at the
that's,
World War II Museum, Jack, and I talked to a guy that was 101, and he said, you know, if I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself.
yeah. Well, I don't know. Alcohol in moderation, I can always recommend.
Okay.
But all in all, it's been a pretty easy gig. I've enjoyed every minute of my career, and I don't know how it could have been any better. And we just today is Jerry and I are celebrating our 70th wedding anniversary.
Oh my gosh. Oh
Uh,
my
I'm,
gosh.
e- I'm
Wow.
even going out to dinner, which that's a rarity for us. But
Well, happy anniversary. And you're just going to have to endure a quick solo, Jack.
yeah, she
Happy
made
birthday.
it really an easy 70 years too. Uh,
Okay, Jack.
uh,
I
I
told her
sure,
to be quiet so I
uh,
can sing happy birthday to you.
yeah, I don't know how many other women would put up with what she did all
She
her
should be a
life,
saint,
but
shouldn't she be?
it all worked out pretty well.
I think so, Jack. So here
Yeah.
you go. I'm going to sing happy birthday to you. Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday to you.
Happy
Happy
birthday.
birthday to you.
Happy
Happy
birthday,
birthday,
dear
dear
Jack.
Jack.
Happy
Happy
birthday
birthday
to
to
you.
you.
And many
That's a great
more.
effort, guys. Thank you very much.
Yeah, our pleasure, Jack. It's just great to have you
Yeah,
on the program. So we've
yeah,
got a really terrific, we're going to end up our season with a really terrific program today.
yeah.
We're having a little bit of bandwidth problems, so even your host and moderator is going to mute himself and turn off his
Well,
microphone.
one thing I'd like to mention, when I
Yes,
came
Jack, go
back
ahead.
from Montana, I quit the supervisor job because I couldn't afford it. It was non-union, and I
Went
raised
back to
my
being on
pay
train cars.
50% when I came back. But I must say that the Great Northern people, we had to work mostly over to Wenatchee and up to Vancouver, BC. The Great Northern people were very helpful to me. They put up with a lot of rough handling, and one of them said, "Well, you slammed us around a little bit first." Nobody said anything. Really a great bunch of guys. Uh, the Great Northern Trainmen, I think they were, I shouldn't say it, but they were a little more gung ho than ours were, I believe.
You were Northern Pacific, right, Bob?
Yeah,
Or John,
but
Jack. We'll get it right one of these days.
they were pretty pretty professional gang of guys, and without exception, really nice and helpful.
Jack, do you realize that Calvin Coolidge was president when you were born?
Uh,
And so we're just glad to have you here, buddy, and thanks. And so sit back, Jack, and relax, and let's watch Bob's program, okay? And on that note, I'm going to say I think we're all set to have Bob take it away.
Yeah, let me see if I can share here.
Yeah, let me do that, and I'm going to stop my video to save a little bandwidth. And let's see here. Let me do one thing. There. Okay.
Guys, are you guys seeing my slide?
Yep, you're all set to go. I'm going to mute.
That book there on the left is a self-published book by a guy named Jack Christensen. I thought I'd lead off with that one there just to give you a couple examples of some of the books that were self-published. Also, one of the very popular books, The Rusty Dusty, was self-published with a couple of GN guys. So what I'm going to really talk about today is the whole idea of publishing your book and being able to make a couple of decisions, but I really think there's a lot of strength in publishing your own book. And Jonathan, I'm having some control problems here. Let's see if this helps. There we go. So here's what I'm going to talk about. Methods to publish. There's really two main methods. And I'm going to follow the self-publishing path, which is readily available to people who can't use a publisher. Then I want to talk a little bit about the elements of a book, how a good plan for your chapters is very important to help your reader as well as to help your organization. And then we'll look a little bit at design samples and review samples, and then we're going to talk a little bit about cost. And you'll see that these things sort of flow together. They sound a little dry to look at, but it's really the elements of doing a book. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was that this sounds very simple, but it's somewhat complicated. I mean, you've got a big stack of manuscript. You've got photos, captions, maps, diagrams, and the whole thing sounds simple, but there's quite a few steps in between. And if you do want to have a publisher do this for you, you gotta have really top-notch material. Plus, it has to sort of fit, in their wheelhouse, and sometimes, things don't. So, and it's more of a process. I don't really intend for you to read all this to see the detail, but really, it starts and you go down a pathway, and maybe you're ready to publish and you've got the electronic stuff, or you don't, and you have to have it designed, and you have to then have proofing and approvals and, all these kinds of things. So when you go to do a book, no matter how you do it, if you do it yourself, you're going to get to go through a lot of these steps yourself. If you have a publisher do it, you would not be involved in some of these steps, but you release a lot of the authority if you have a publisher do this. So I'll sort of be talking about a process, and this is just a visualization of a typical process. But there's one very important thing. You don't want to do this if you want to make money, because generally, you will not make money whether you self-publish or whether you have a publisher publish for you. There's not much money involved. The book I recently published, I think I lose $25 every time I sell one if I add up all the costs. So anyway, so that's just a warning. So let's take a look at these two pathways. On the left is using a publisher like Phil Beach did for his Wheat Country Railroad. On the right is a self-published book that I did up at Skycomish for Ted Cleveland. And we'll talk a little bit about the publisher path, and then we'll spend most of the presentation talking about a self-publishing path. So if you use a publisher, you essentially collect up all your materials and send it to the publisher, and then they'll either accept you or reject you. And frequently you can tell a very experienced author because he has lots of rejection letters. And publishers are sort of picky about what they publish. They have sort of an element that they publish, certain topics that they deal with, certain geographics that they deal with. But they also have to feel they can make money, and that's becoming tougher and tougher with the book. But if you do get accepted, you essentially deliver your manuscript, your photos, your captions, everything to the publisher, and you sign a contract with them, and then you wait. And they'll get you into the schedule. They may move the schedule, change the schedule, and so on, but you're sort of on standby for a while. Recently, we did one with Mike Bergman, and his was a very fast pathway. I think it was something like 18 months when his book on Seattle trolleys and streetcars were published, but that's very uncommon. And if you do have a publisher accept you, essentially the publisher does all the work, other than the manuscript and the materials, but they also make all the decisions. So they may have the author do reviews, but really your publisher is going to decide. If you think a map or a diagram would be better on a different page, the publisher is going to decide that. If you're doing the publishing, you get to decide. But the publisher does the work. They print the books. They generally own the copyright also. They advertise, they take orders, they ship, and they make any profit. That's where the money goes. And what you get out of that is you're going to get some free books they will sell you additional books at the same rate they sell to a bookstore. They may arrange talks and book signings and events to help you publicize it. And they may or may not pay a royalty. And generally, that royalty is pretty small. I've been involved in a couple of books where royalties were paid. And I think, after one of the books I was involved in is after 5 years, the royalties totaled like $98.42 or something. And royalties are generally based on sales and so on. So that's the one route where a publisher does everything. And this is the old-fashioned route, the way it's always been done. And they are when we didn't have self-publishing. And it is maybe the best route if you want to minimize your personal involvement. You also give up your personal decisions. So then we'll come to self-publishing. And here you start the same way. You create the manuscript and materials. And in today's world, that means electronic materials and digital photographs and so on, because it really has become a digital world. You decide if you need an editor or not. And the reason I put the dollar signs there is editors are expensive. The book I did recently was about 500 pages, and the cost for the editor was about $8 per page. And when we got it all done, we thought it was worth every cent to have them do that. But, if you're thinking about the whole cost, you have to include that price too. And then you need to find a printer. So since you're in essentially your own publisher, you need to find a printer. And that's actually relatively easy to do. There are several excellent ones here in Washington State. I'll mention one later. There's all kinds of them online, but that's easy to do. The other element you get to decide is who builds the book. In other words, you've got text and you've got photos and diagrams and so on, maps, but the layout, the font, the style, the look and feel of the book is all about what's called page makeup. And you can either do that yourself, like Tim Rep is currently working on a book and he's done that himself. Or you can buy that service. And if you're not experienced with using a computer to do book layout, you probably will want to buy that service. That's why I put the dollar signs there. So if you got a manuscript and you had it edited and you've picked someone to do the design, frequently the person who does the design also works with frequently the printer. Then you're going to sign a contract. But here's a big difference. Anything going on that is approved, you do the approves. And you can do reviews over and over again until you're happy, as opposed to the publisher being happy or the publisher saying that's the last review. On my book, we actually had something like 9 proof sets of the book made before we were actually happy with it for printing. And even though it's a digital world, you make all of your decisions on what it's going to look like based on a proof paper copy, because that's what your audience is going to see. So we did that 9 times, and it cost $150 every time we did it. But we wanted everything to be as perfect as it could, and we were our own publisher, and we're glad we did it. And then when it comes time to print, you get to actually approve the print master before anything actually touches the printer, the printing process itself. So this is a big difference when it comes to the process of doing it yourself, or if you're doing it with a publisher. The other things you get to do is you get to pay for all this. So you're going to pay for the printing, pay for their editing, pay for the design. And so you're putting the money up front as opposed to the publisher putting the money and labor up front. But when you are done, you get the books. Or you may have an arrangement for someone to receive the books for you and do shipping and so on. But generally, self-published runs are relatively small, and a lot of the authors do their own shipping and so on. So you would get the books. You would do your own advertising. You'd arrange your own talks and presentations to promote the book. You'd maybe arrange your own signing sessions and so on to help the, you might do might send in to various journals, book reviews that you wrote yourself, so to get a little publicity. You would sell the books too. So you would take the orders and ship them yourself, and then you get all the profit. And I put profit in quotes because generally, in the end, there's not a lot of profit, at least on the ones I have been involved in. But what you really gain by self-publishing is control. You get to decide when something's good enough or not good enough, and so on. I'm going to show you several examples from that. So these are the sort of the two processes we're talking about. And I had mentioned that there's lots of online materials if you decide to go this way. And I just picked a few here. The book on the left there, Making a Book, is from Gorham Printing there in Centralia. I've used them for 4 or 5 or 6 of the books I've been involved in. In fact, I was just down there a month or two ago with Arthur to have an informal review with the book guys and the printing guys and the designer type person. And they spent 2 hours with us, and it was very, very helpful. It was complimentary. But you can also go online, and there are lots of other book publishing companies that are designed for self-publishing. And it's real easy to find them. Just type in self-publishing, and you're going to be inundated by people. What we did when we did our book on cameras is we picked one that was local. So like if it's in Centralia, I could drive down there if I needed to. And I drove down there a lot of times. But finding online help, Gorham will actually send you a copy of this 25 or I guess a 40-page book on how to build a book. All of these other companies have very similar things they can send you or online. So that's just really not a problem in finding a printer. So that's kind of a summary of self-publishing. Using a publisher, getting accepted by a publisher is also one of the big things. Before I go to talk about the book essentials, do we have any questions? Jonathan, you can kind of monitor for questions there if you like.
Yeah, and if anybody's got any questions, of course, everybody knows that you can enter them into the chat too, and then I'll keep an eye on that. And
yeah,
when we've got a question, then we'll go to it. Bob, I think everybody is either enthralled or asleep, so keep going.
Okay, I'll keep going. So let's talk about the book essentials. And this is really, I didn't realize how important this is to get your arms around what the elements of a book are and keep track of those as you go through the process. So this is an actual sheet we created for the camera book I recently did, and I wanted to use it to show you about the book structure. So in the top, under content, you got a title and you got a cover. That seems pretty simple, but sometimes it's not simple. You'll see how many cycles it took us to do ours. In the beginning of the book, you have things called front matter. So it's the dedication, the contents, the acknowledgments, all of those things that you'll need to drive up. And notice we were keeping track of the status, and it was either yellow or red or green. And if you look at acknowledgments there, notice it's version 18. So we did 18 versions of the acknowledgments till we thought we had it right. And it's important to have a little check sheet or some method of keeping track as you go here. And in our first section were cameras. So we had several sections talking about various kinds of cameras. And then we talked about projectors and accessories. And this company was involved in World War II. And then we did corporate history. So that's kind of the content. But then the back matter is the appendix and the index and all that kind of thing. And you get to decide what kind of material you put there. Since you would be the publisher in a self-published book, you get to decide what goes there. There are some standard things that go there, but it's your book, you do it your way. I wanted to mention text editing. This was very, very important to us. It turned out this improved our book immensely when we did the camera book. And you can just see kind of some of the inputs we got here from a publisher, from an editor. But we spent $4,000 on editing. It was a 500-page book, and it was worth every penny. And we still can call up and say, well, does the dash go before the comma? And they'll consult with us and give us those kind of answers. We felt it really improved our product. Another thing you get to decide is the size of the type. So, a different size type makes a lot of sense, but the bigger the type, the more pages it takes. And if your cost is based on pages, you have to kind of balance that. So if you're doing it yourself, you get to decide all that and decide how many pages it will be. And also readability is very important. Some types are more readable, some fonts are more readable, and some sizes are more readable. So that's what the decision you would make. The paper is another important thing. What kind of paper are you going to use? You know, for a railroad book, you're going to have you want some pretty nice pictures in there. You're probably going to use what we did. We used an 80-pound gloss text paper. There's other kinds of paper, but the better the paper, the more the expense. You know, are you going to do 3 columns on a page, or like on the right, are you going to do 2 columns per page? These are decisions you get to make based on the look and feel and the designer or yourself. You know, you can make some basic ones, layouts and so on. What we did was we picked 2 columns per page because we felt 3 columns per page was too much like reading a newspaper. And the story we wanted to tell, we thought worked better at 2 columns per page. So there's a little more text per line. And the other thing we learned was you have to think of your design as 2 pages. That's the way the readers see it. So you have the left page and a right page. You don't design them independently. You design them together and sort of make them flow. And you'll see some elements of visual flow where, you know, there's kind of an S curve here between the illustrations to kind of give a feel to these. And I'll talk some more about those. But how they look, you would get to decide all this as a self-publisher. Now here's another one where, you know, the design actually put a map right through the middle of the 2 pages. So again, thinking of 2 pages and how the map kind of flows you through the text. The text was sort of extensive here, but the text relates to the map. So it made a lot of sense to design it with the map crossing the center of the book. This is another element, especially important in railroad and in camera books, the quality of the pictures. So on the left-hand side was one of the proof prints we had done, but on the right-hand side is what the picture really looked like. And so we rejected the first proof, or this proof, whatever proof number it was. We wanted a higher quality photo. And you get to decide for every photo in your book whether it meets your standards for quality or not. And we had a lot of this. And this was one of the things where we had I was one of 3 authors for the book on cameras. We had one author that was a very stickler on the pictures, and he became kind of a pain in the ass, but it was because of him that the quality we have is so high. So photo quality is very important, and as a self-publisher, you decide. Another element that we got confused about was the index. Notice up here where we had 3 authors, so we had entered Dr. Lee L. Davenport 3 different ways. So when the index was generated, we had 3 entries for the same person. And there's very easy ways to not have this occur, but a lot of editing of your index is important. And it's one of the things we had 14 pages of index or something, and it took us, we had not planned to do that extra work. We just thought it was sort of automatic, but it's something that we learned. The most modern way of doing indexing is to write in the middle of your text, middle of your electronic text. If you want the word robot to be in your index, you just type in these marks and put an XE robot. And here's another XE model D. And when you get to the end, the developer, the designer will just push go, and the software will generate your index for you. These words do not show in your text, but they're special codes you put in. And now you don't have to worry about getting the pages correct in your index because the software does that for you. Now, we had talked about design, and there's different levels of design. If you decide to have someone design the book for you, you know, you can just have the cover designed, you can have the interior designed, you can get a free design consultation, which we just did recently with an author. But notice this one says starting at $3.99. I think we paid $1,800 for our internal design for the camera book we did. Now, of course, it was 500 pages. So, but these services are available, and we have found them to actually be relatively reasonable and very helpful people. But here are things that are not included: editing, spell checking, typing, purchasing your ISBN number. That's a number that goes in all the books that are going to be used in bookstores or libraries. You get to buy one of those. I think it's 35 bucks. They don't do, this doesn't include illustrations. You need to have that done. Doesn't include photography. Doesn't include the actual printing. So that's, as you would be the publisher, you would still be in charge of those things. Covers, we've talked about covers. I showed you the cover Jack had and one that John Langlot had there. This is a big deal. It takes you much longer than you really think it should. Some of them just right away fit, but some of them need lots of design and review and so on. So it's something to actually think of. And your cover really is your front cover, your back cover, your spine, and then you have two insides of the cover too that you can use to promote the book. So any questions here about the elements of a book or elements? Because I'm going to start talking about chapters. And then we'll get into the design pieces that you would have to deal with as we go on. Any questions? Jonathan, we have any chat?
Yeah, Bob, actually, Bill Russ has got a couple of questions in here. I've been playing tag with him. Because remember, Bill spends part of his year, the only CPA I know, Bob, that lives in Hanoi, Vietnam. So the question is, can the mailing of self-publishing books be contracted out to somebody else?
Yes, there are many of the printers have a service you can purchase that will receive orders, make shipments, confirm those, and some of them actually will actually take the money and every month send you your share. They charge you to do that, but that definitely can be contracted out, and it's relatively easy to arrange.
All right. And Bill's got another question, Bob. I'll read it to you. I've written my book, but I don't have many pictures to help tell the story. Can PNRA help me search for photos? If so, then one, how would I search for those photos? Online or while I'm in Burien? And two, what would PNRA charge me for that?
So there's several dependencies here. Certainly, the best way to start would be to send PNRA a list of the things you're interested in, and we would do some quick searching and see what we have. And then also, if it's an NP or a GN or whatever the Railroad History Organization is, we would get their experts involved because they probably are aware of pictures that have not been cataloged yet that may work well for the book. And then they would, they may have 4,000 or 5,000 photos scanned that don't show up in cataloging because they haven't had enough volunteers to get them all cataloged. And then each of the organizations usually have their own process for costing. And if you're a member of the organization, like it's a Great Northern picture, and you're a Great Northern member, they actually have a cost sheet, and then members get half price. And so frequently, they would provide a photograph to be used in a commercial venture for like $5, and they would send you the scan. If it was not a commercial venture, like being published by a historical society or something, it could actually be free. If it's for a governmental kind of thing, it would definitely be free. And if it's like for a high school kid writing a chapter on railroads, they're definitely going to be complimentary copies. So we could certainly explore that and show you the elements. And it's actually many other local organizations operate similarly. Some larger institutions have a little higher fee structure because they're trying to, if they're supported by a government or something, they maybe also have requirements to make some income they have to do with. But I have found it to be relatively inexpensive. I've found a lot of owners of pictures to be very helpful. And I'll talk a little bit more about permissions as we go on.
All right. Thanks, Bob. Let's keep going.
Okay, so we've talked about publish yourself. We've talked about the elements of a book and how you kind of got to keep track of them because the project gets bigger. But it's the chapter elements that I think are also very, very important for the readers. And this will help the author also organize their materials. So let's take a look at chapters. When we did the book recently on the cameras, we created this list on the left as sort of our standard elements of a chapter. And then we made sure that each chapter dealt with that. So this chapter on the right here was about a couple of cameras called C44s. We treated it as a standalone subject. We also put it in context. So at the beginning, for example, in our case, at the beginning of this chapter on C44s, we would name the competition for those cameras at the time. We also talked a little bit about the United States economy at the time this came out and what was going on. And, you know, this was in the element there of the Korean War when these came out. So we mentioned that because that slowed down production. So that's what we meant by putting it in context. And this is important for a lot of readers. And then, of course, the content information was all about those cameras. And any unique elements about them, we included those. And then we always had a summary. So our chapter created, you know, it was standalone, in context. What's the content? What's unique? What's the summary? And then we had references and endnotes. Now you would, in your book, you would get to decide what these standard elements are, but this really helps the reader understand how you're presenting and lets them go to a chapter and sort of know the elements that are going to be there without surprise or without not being able to find something. So I'd highly recommend some sort of a standard chapter structure. The other thing we realized right away, and these are camera examples, the same will apply with railroads, big, bold pictures are very important. And that's what really holds people's attention. And so this is something we've concentrated on, was to have a lot of very good pictures. And I had mentioned that before, but that's just, many people will only see the pictures and the captions, and they won't actually read the text. So you can sort of tell your story two ways. One in the text, reinforce it in the captions, and you're going to hit two audiences. Contributing photos, well, this is sort of related to the question. There's going to be a lot of people who can contribute photos to you. And you may not be able to find them all, but you may be able to find someone who can do them for you. And that really should be a part of what you're working on, and let other experts assist you. And if you get experts doing this, there generally is not going to be a charge. You just give them a credit and make sure their name is mentioned in the caption. And comparison photos are important. This is especially true in railroad. You know, if you got two locomotives and one of them had the air brakes and one didn't, one of them had the compressor and one didn't. This is a camera example, but the comparison photos are very key to making things in context and understandable for readers. Here's a railroad example. This is the Bill Kajic photos here, where he was talking about a lamp, and he needed to really illustrate the bell at the top. And so he did that with, you know, extreme close-up photographs to talk about it when he did his program. So permissions, permissions are usually not a problem. They may be no cost, but you want to keep a written approval. In other words, you want to make sure you have that email or have that letter or have that receipt or whatever you need to do. If you need to pay, you know, make sure you have the written permission, and then keep all your files. So there's no question about it in the future, or that your publisher or your printer may say, "What, do you have permission for this picture from Mr. Vollrath? Because Mr. Vollrath's a worldwide known photographer, and we know that he charges." And then you say, "Right here, yeah, I have the letter from his grandson, you know, I have permission to use it," and so on and so on. That does come up, and it actually can come up after the book's printed too. So you just want to keep those around. Drawings and illustrations. In our case, you can see we were talking cameras, but this is really, really works well with railroads. And I'm going to show you some examples here too. These are very key to people's understanding. And the reason is the way you process information. Your brain usually processes information on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And the right-hand side is usually does the photos. And if you start with a diagram, all the edges and everything are exposed and identified there, and your brain kind of locks that in. And then if you move to a photograph of the same thing, you just reinforce, you know, how someone remembers what they saw. So diagrams are very important. Here's a good example from Rich Wilkins. Rich is working on a book, and notice up here he's got this trestle being built. But he wanted to really make sure the reader knew what was going on there. So he literally put in an illustration of exactly how that bridge is being built, So now when you look at the picture, you have a better understanding of what's really going on there. So this is an excellent example of using illustrations to actually reinforce a picture. And he's got a couple of books started himself, and he does his own design. And this is, he did a lot of, he said he used to watch Mike Pearsall over his shoulder frequently as he did page makeup. Of course, maps in a railroad book, maps are super important. People a lot of times may want to, they may want to go to Rockport and find the place where the old depot was and walk around there. Well, a map helps them find it, but also, you think of the roads and so on. Maybe these roads don't even exist anymore. Maybe the names got changed to first, second, third, for in today's world. Understanding if you're talking about trains coming in from someplace and departing for someplace, or how they use the Y. These are very important, and they're very simple designs with big text, easily readable text, really helps a railroad book. Here's an example of a very common thing we do in railroad books is we talk about places along the line. And so what Rich did here is he created a simple map, and then on the pages before and after this map, he has all of these stations he's talking about. So you can literally read the paragraphs and take a look at the spurs, see where Bacon Creek was, see where Sky Creek was, and so on. Relating the visual to the text to the photo is something that really helps your reader, and it also helps tell your story. Data tables is another thing. This is a camera example, but you can just imagine here a listing of all the different locomotives from a certain logging company or so on. These are very important. They also help in the design, and we'll talk a little bit about that in the design, about how they help balance designs. But data tables, you should get sort of a standard format for them if you're going to use them, and then follow that. And then in the design, I'll show you in a little bit how that fits in. Documents. There's all kinds of documents, and these are all camera documents, but they're the same kind of things you find for railroads. They add credibility. If you can grab a document that shows or illustrates what you're talking about, and that came out in 1922 or something, it helps add credibility to your discussion of the same topic. So I think this is a key element in railroad books as well as in camera books. Like, here's a great example. So if you're talking about snow dozers, you're going to add credibility if you have a picture and you have an official railroad drawing engineering diagram of that. It's the same kind of thing, and you're adding in credibility and reinforcing to your audience about, yeah, this guy's knows what he's talking about. Now, this is something that's sometimes not understood and not used a lot, but in the camera book, we interviewed a lot of people. So we talked to Leroy Cohn, and we interviewed him for a couple of hours, and he gave us a lot of information. So what we would do in our book is we would be talking about a certain thing, and when we would say, in 1949, Mr. Cohn came out with the so-and-so and such and such. His memory is very clear. In our interview in the year 2000, he said such and such and such and such and such and such. Well, again, what did the people who were there at the time have to say, or what did they write down in letters? And can you work that into your discussion to help reinforce the credibility of what you're presenting? It's very simple to do, and we found it very useful for cameras. And if you take a look at railroad books, you'll find it's used there frequently. And also, be sure you maintain your permissions here. If you do an interview with someone, have them agree to have you use it. Or if you take it out of some newspaper about Lee Davenport talking about something or some document, cite the document. So there's no doubt about it that you know where this came from and you didn't make it up. People stories, super important to talk about this engineer and his family and so on. And when they moved to town, and this guy who was a boiler wiper and so on and so on. These add a lot of personal relationship to the readers, and is an element that really can help you tell the story and communicate with your readers. Now, what we decided to do is put a notes for collectors, because we're writing about cameras, and the collectors had some basic information that was helpful to them. So this was at the end of all of our chapters for every kind of camera we did. It's not something maybe that would work with all railroad books, but if there was, this might say, what's it like today? And you might show a before and after picture of the same site, or you might mention that all the town streets that changed, and now you go to the Fifth Street, it's no longer called Railroad Avenue, those kinds of things if you're talking about a site. But if you put them in the same location in your chapters, then your readers get comfortable with them. And then, of course, standard endnotes. This is something that you should sort of decide ahead of time, figure out how you're going to do this. There are some standards that you can use here. You kind of got to pick the standard you're going to use and then go with it. However, it is your book, so you don't actually have to follow the Chicago Manual of Style version 5 if you don't want to. So some of these you'll see probably follow that kind of thing, and some of them are just a note here about Thomas H. White. So now we've covered the chapter elements, and I want to move on to design, because this is one of the things that really makes or doesn't make a railroad book. Are there any more chat questions, Jonathan?
Well, Bob, I was writing down a question to ask you about the Chicago Manual of Style right when you mentioned it. So as usual, you're one step ahead of me. What could I tell you? So,
well, I want to get on. If we can, we'll just answer, or we'll go on to the end here, where I think we'll have some pretty good discussion too.
yeah, absolutely. It's been good so far. So using a book like the Chicago Manual of Style then is essential for those that you want to make sure all your paragraphs are headed properly and indented and all that jazz, right?
And if you don't want to learn that yourself, your editor will know all about that.
All right. Well, let's keep rolling.
Okay. So let's talk about design. Now, there's InDesign, InDesign is the most commonly used program to build pages currently. And like the page on the left, we thought the pictures at the bottom left weren't big enough. We wanted them bigger. So what we asked them to do was we just drew an X through this diagram to say we got to make them bigger. Because we own the book, we're making the decisions. And so the picture on the right is what we suggested, and that's exactly what was published. So now we just felt, the design worked better. And we actually took this diagram that we X'd out here, and we thought that was very important. And we made that a full page diagram. So it's full size. And again, you own the book, you can ask for this to be done with your designer, or you can certainly do it yourself. If you're doing it yourself, you're probably going to want a design consultant to test you and ask you, does this work for you? Because it doesn't work for me. This page on the left seems too crowded, and they'll give you those kind of, inputs. But anyway, in the end, they're sort of like a text editor, they're like a visual editor for you. Here's a very common thing we had happen. We had lots of cameras that looked the same, and our designer would put the wrong camera in the wrong place. So we would then just come back to her with a note saying, hey, move these two pictures. The text doesn't change. This was very common for us because a lot of these, you can see how closely they look together. These are called bricks, and you can see why. Argus C3 bricks, and they are the shape of a brick. So it's easy to mix them up. This is one thing I can't mention enough, and I mentioned it before. The tonal quality of your photographs is one of the highest, most important things you can deal with if you can't deal with other things. If you get a picture that looks like the one on the left, and the original looked like one on the right, you got to put your hand up and say, no, something's wrong here. And, you make them do it over, or you ask them to do it over. And in the end, you can make your printed copy look just like you want it to. And you shouldn't hesitate this, because you're the publisher. It's your book. You don't want to be thought of as a medium quality picture kind of guy. You want to be thought of as a high quality picture, and that going to help sell your book too. So I mentioned covers. Now we're doing camera books. So these are some of the camera brochures and stuff we had. We wanted to, say, okay, we'll pick a cover. This will take about a day. Well, it did not take a day. What's the title? Oh, we got all these titles. We had a list of 50 titles. What's the thing going to look like? We had all kinds of this. This probably took us a month of exchanging these things and getting various versions drafted up and so on. Here's the one we went with, a very simple, straightforward, textured view that actually also is a takeoff on what the company maintenance manuals looked like. Company maintenance manuals had this kind of blue and this in the center. And we just thought, well, okay, let's call it Fine American Cameras, Argus, Fine American Cameras, and our names down here. But this was not trivial, and it took a while. And now let's talk more about the design of the pages. I had mentioned to you it's 2 pages. So think of 2 pages in design. And Jonathan, can you actually see my cursor on the screen?
Yeah, Bob, I can, as a matter of fact. So when
Okay.
you're pointing to things, you are emphasizing them, whether you mean to
Okay.
or not.
Take a look at the visual flow here. Notice you got a strong title, but the visual flow is something like an S. You see this S here? This is very common, very comfortable for people, and we actually used it on purpose after learning how to do some of this with a professional designer. You're going to see some that didn't work as well, and you'll see some that worked even better. But anyway, this is an element that you might not realize when you start off. Here's one we didn't think worked as well. We did publish it, but here's a document, an example of inserting a document from 1947 to emphasize this camera, which we were showing over here, and talk about it, and to essentially emphasize that, yeah, we didn't make all this up. This is what they said in 1947. So example, you could do the same thing with a railroad blueprint or a map or whatever. But it's important for your credibility if you're trying to maybe even make a controversial statement. Here's one that in the end, I pulled out. We didn't think it flowed as well, but notice the S kind of shape here. There's this S shape. We felt this side of the page was too strong and kind of overwhelmed the left-hand side of the page. We didn't fully solve the situation, but we put a data table down here. So once you got the data table down here, you had better balance, and it sort of formed this S shape that readers tend to like. Here's one where we weren't really happy with this, but we went with it. What we did we weren't happy because this was all text. We inserted this advertisement for the same camera. we felt like we were stuck with having to use big close-ups because this is a very rare camera. There's only one of them. And so we did it, but we thought, okay, well, this might balance, and it balanced some, not as good as we were if it was perfect, but we were trying to get 90%. Same kind of thing here. Notice here's a document from a long time ago relating to, and notice the basic S shape here. Very common way to do it. Here's one where there's a lot of text. Sometimes you're going to get blocked into where you really have a lot of text. You might have full pages of text. In this case, what we did was we went ahead and inserted a data section and then a very high quality photograph. So here now, these two things kind of offset this basic text over here from a design point of view. Another thing people really learn well is people learn from an illustration if they're trying to see something. And sometimes it's important to show the illustration before you show the photograph. And what we were trying to do here was help with that, help in the transition. If you read all the text and everything, you'd understand what we were talking about. But the idea here, show an illustration and show the photos to make it easier for the reader. Just a couple more here. Here's a data table. Here's a drawing. This is not actually a photograph. But here's how we were talking about people, and I mentioned important people that really were influential in this corporation. We actually put pictures right out of, we would make high quality copies right out of, annual reports and so on, and then talk about their contribution, and then try to make it, again, visually interesting for the reader. Now, this is maybe one of the last ones here, and this really applies to railroads too. There's all kinds of details that you want to show, and it's extremely important to show them big enough to be seen. So what we had to do, is we had all of these little things here, speed dials, right? And we wanted you to be able to see the differences, want the reader to be able to see the end of the lenses and so on. So we just literally had a section where we talked about the major features of this camera, and we would show them over time. Like here was no attachment. Here's an attachment. Here's one screwed down with this many screws. Here's one with one screw. We talked about all that. But again, showing the differences between elements of some sort of a railroad or markings on the side of the car or differences, you can do exactly the same way. And modelers love that. Again, data tables. We did a lot of data tables, and a lot of railroad books could benefit from more data tables about mileage and mileposts and you know, and where the bridges were and where the tunnels were. A lot of times people have a hard time figuring that out after they've read it and they're trying to understand it. Data tables would help them understand where those things were and simplify it for the reader. Okay, let's just talk dependencies, and we'll talk cost, and that'll end us here. Remember, if you're the publisher, you get to decide the appendices. You probably ought to have a index of some kind. But what we decided to do was we talked about other companies. Vargas cameras had some code words they used. We talked about the rare cameras. We wanted to talk about the major changes in features. And if you had one in your hand, we gave you a table to tell you what year it was made. You could figure it out. And for corrections, we actually have created a website so that if you want to, you can go to our website and submit corrections or additional information rather than try and write us a letter. So this actually, we've had 4 or 5 people do this already, and it's working out great. Indexing, we've talked about this. I wanted to emphasize it one more time. This is the only way to really do your index. Insert it into your original text electronically and let the software do that for you. It's just very, very consistent, and you have total control of it rather than trying to manually do an index. Right, when you get to the end here, I wanted to mention 2 other things. The book itself is very, very costly. So all this printing, all this paper and so on, but there are some alternatives. There are audiobooks. So if you've got something that could be dealt with in audio kinds of things, you've got that option. Here's a Northern Pacific store. These are books on a CD. Well, CDs cost about 12 cents a piece. So you don't actually buy the book, you get it on a CD. Also, thumb drives. So here's a good example of from the NP store. They've got this thing called the Vistadome package, and they deliver the whole thing to you on a thumb drive as opposed to a big, heavy book. So if you've got a topic or if you would like to try some of these this way, you can certainly do that, and it cuts down your cost per quote book immensely. It's not the same as, you know, sitting by the fire on a winter evening looking through your book, but it's a different way to distribute, and there are many of these available. That's why I just wanted to mention them. Okay, let's end up here by talking cost. When you talk cost, you got your personal time. Well, that's sort of free. You got editor's time. Well, if you did that yourself or had other friends do it for you, it's just time. But it might not be as good as having an editor do it. There's the design, with actually making of the pages. If you do that yourself, it's your time. If you have it done, there's a cost. The production time, that's really the printing, and you really probably can't do that yourself. There's advertising, and then there's the selling and shipping. So those are sort of the cost elements. And then there's all kinds of online. Off to the left here, you see cost estimators for your books, and they'll basically tell you if you got a 150-page book and you do it in color and it's 5 by 5.5 by 8.5, it's gonna, you do 100 of them, it's gonna cost you $50 a piece. If you do 500, it's gonna cost you $39 a piece. This is really easy to do. There's lots of online estimators. For my camera book, if we took all of these cost elements and added it up, the total cost was $96. And so we tried to start selling them at 90. Well, that didn't go anywhere. We sold a few, and we gave quite a few away to museums and archives and so on. And now we're selling them at 70. And so, you know, we're losing $26 a book, and we're probably going to lower the price. In our case, we talked about this ahead of time, and we don't need to really recover the money. It's more, in our case, it was more a passion of getting the information out there. So this is all known up front. And you certainly can calculate this yourself before you start off on a project like this. So we're going to stop here and we'll do some discussion, but just where we've been, we've talked about how to publish, talked about self-publishing, elements of a book, chapter elements and design, and then finally just a little bit on cost in relation to the book. So Jonathan, I'm gonna stop sharing here. What have you got in chat?
Well, Bob, actually, if I went back to page 59 for a second, I did have a specific kind of question for you. And 59 is just as good a page as any. to sort of pick as my question. I've got a few from the
You want
audience.
50? You said 59, right?
Yeah, 59. Okay, so here's the picture of all these buttons, which is all very interesting and stuff. But where did you get the pictures, and what obligation or how do you? I got this picture from the Argus catalog, or I got this picture from my friend Frank, or how do you acknowledge how you got this stuff? Or do you
Yeah,
need
it's very, 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 very important to acknowledge pictures, especially if they're not your own. If you want to acknowledge pictures you took, you can just say photographed by the author.
right?
But if you have a caption, very, very important to say where you got that picture if it's not yours. Now, all of these pictures here I took.
Oh,
So I happen to have the photographic ability to do this. But in many of our other examples, like the example of all those gentlemen standing together, uh, that was a copy of a photograph, an old photograph, and then done by one of our authors. I did these. One of the other authors did some others. And, we're using three different kinds of cameras in three different cities. When we brought these all together, it was an element of a nightmare to actually make them work and look okay because we all had different standards in the way we did things and what the quality of our cameras and so on. But I think the point here is you're going to want a lot of pictures from other people because it's less for you to do. If you have pictures in your collection that you happen to know you got from Warren Wing, your question is going to be, well, do I cite Mr. Wing or do I cite
exactly.
my own collection?
Right.
If you've got a picture you know was taken by Harold Hall or Harold Hill, you generally are going to say Harold Hill photo in the Robert E. Kelly collection or something like that. If you have a picture that is actually owned by the Museum of History and Industry, and you know it's owned by them, you're going to need to talk with them, and then they may actually tell you what the citation will read. It may say Museum of History and Industry 146295-1. And then you would do it their way because they were giving you permission to use it at a very low cost. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually it does. For example, I know when I got the images from the Port of Seattle for the Frank Zellerhoff presentation, I made sure that we cited those images exactly like they wanted them cited, and same with dealing with CRPA, because to your point, Bob, about keeping track of this stuff, I've had people come out of the woodwork on presentations that are years old, all of a sudden saying somehow that this and if you've got records like I like, then you can go all the way back through and know that you've got provenance over every single item. Because your worst nightmare would be you did something and it turns out you didn't have provenance, right?
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing is, in the past they had, I don't know if you guys remember, but they used to have companies that would send you negatives, and they just come in the mail, and you could either buy them or send them back. And they were sending the same negative to 4 or 5 or 10 people, and 4 or 5 or 10 people may have bought it, but it's a copy. They just picture, picture, picture. Well, they may all think they own the original, and this is a common thing for us at PNRA to figure out who actually, how many people actually own this original and where did it come from. It's not a nightmare, but you need to be systematic and know what you did.
And keep good records. Yeah, keep good records. And then in the chat, I've also got a number of good comments here. And, Bill Russ is back saying, can I design the book myself? If I design the book myself, then does the publisher provide me with the design software they prefer working with? And I think
So,
you kind of answered that in a couple different pieces.
yeah, in today's world, um, InDesign is a software that's a part of an Adobe suite, and it's the biggest use of I'd say worldwide in PageMaker. And that's Photoshop is in there, and they have a drawing program in there. They have Adobe is in there. Adobe has a couple of other things, and so they're together. And it's called a suite. That's going to be 90% of them. Yes, you can do that. the publisher does not provide you the software. You would need to own the software. And then when you get the book exactly the way you want it, you actually are going to provide the publisher a publishable PDF. So if you have it exactly the way you want it in InDesign, you would have it saved as a publishable PDF, which is a very high quality PDF. And you would then probably transmit that to the printer electronically. And that's what they would make your proof from. So you make a proof copy, and then again, you'd want to see it in paper.
Okay.
Jonathan, what was the other element of the question?
I think that kind of covered it, Bob. I should just, spoiler alert here. Bill, Russ, and I talked about this at the office, and of course, Bill's dad worked for the Milwaukee Road as an engineer, and
Yeah.
we're talking about a book. Bill and I talked about his book on his father's travels and experiences. Bill, why send the Jack when I could send the King? You want to tell us a little bit about your book, if you're there?
Yeah, sure. I've got my dad's records, and in those records are delay reports and some messages he got on certain trips of things to do. And I thought, if I put all this stuff together, it tells a pretty good story. He ran over every run there was out of Tacoma, and I've got delay reports for all of those except the one to Raymond. But maybe I'll find something else to cover that. But it's basically a trip on the Coast Division on every run out of Tacoma, and just describes how the run went, just down to some fine details of it. And I think it tells a good story for historians to look back and see how the Milwaukee operated the Coast Division. I just need some pictures to help tell the story.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah, and I think those pictures will be very important especially to the casual reader, and they're going to really reinforce the story. So I think, we can certainly help you look for those, and there's a lot of resources in that area, I think, that would assist you.
Good, thank you.
Jonathan, I see one other there about hardcover versus softcover, Jonathan.
Yeah, I saw that one, and I've got another one here that you sort of alluded to, which is the idea of ebook. So why don't you take both of those, Bob?
Yeah, so let's talk hardcover, softcover. Softcover books can actually be very large. My 500-page camera book is a softcover book. And it really comes down to cost and balance. Adding hardcover to a 500-page camera book was about $40 per book. So if you have a smaller book, it's going to be less, and so on. And so it's very common to have a softcover version and a hardcover version, and maybe the hardcover version is a much smaller print number, and maybe those are the ones you put in libraries and so on like that. But you have to just sort of balance that out yourself and take a look at those costs. And usually those cost estimators are right online, so you can kind of get in the ballpark before you go see your printer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the next one?
The other one was, and you sort of touched on it when you were talking about the Vistadome package, but creating an ebook versus a print book. And are there different, what are some of the deltas there on that?
Well, there are enormous cost differences. For example, if you decide to self-distribute on a DVD, your total, quote, printing is only going to be the cost of the DVD and the making of the DVD and the cost of the insert titles and so on that go in the front and back of it. So you're going to be less than $5 per CD or DVD for your printing cost. The printing cost for my book was something in the neighborhood of $35 each. So that makes it real simple. And a lot of times you can, quote, print yourself if you're doing DVDs. If you have the computing equipment or know someone who does, you can do that. Now, the downside of that is many readers don't want to hold the DVD in their hand and look at it sitting by the fire with the coffee in the evening. They don't want to sit in front of a computer or some device to actually see your book and read your book. More and more people are used to that, but a lot of the people buying books are not. So that's sort of the yin and the yang of that. And The Vistadome package, that thing is delivered on a thumb drive, but you got to plug the thumb drive in. If you want a paper copy so you can sit by the fire and read it, you got to print it yourself. Well, I don't know how much it would cost to do that, but it's so much per page on your printer. So those are the yings and the yangs of it. Also, many audiobooks there are other forms of putting your book online so people download it. At the same time, that eliminates or minimizes the quote publishing cost, but it maximizes the part that the reader has to do, and the reader has to modify the reading on the screen. If they wanted to print, then they have to print it themselves, which it could be fairly expensive for them.
Okay. Well, that does kind of contrast it then. Do we have more in the gallery for Bob? Now, one thing I will tell everybody, a question that does come up, these and all of our other programs, Bob, end up on a YouTube channel, and this program will be going up on YouTube, probably later this afternoon, if that's okay with you, right? I didn't ask you before the program.
It's good with me. There's another one in chat there too I think it's from Mike about Amazon books and selling ebooks. It's not that it's not easy to do. It's not that it doesn't look exactly the same. It's that people like me are not going to sit in front of a screen to read a book. That's the fundamental difference. Now, my wife, she has a little device and she reads books from the library. I can't stand to do that. I got to go buy the book, put the book in my hand, take my marker, make notes on the edges. So it is easy to do, and it looks exactly the same. And I know people who have done it and done it successfully. I've just never done it, but it's the fundamental way the reader interacts with the book that changes to a screen that would need to be considered, carefully.
Okay.
Especially
you know what, Bob? I mean, I've been through your book, and I've been down in Chehalis with you, working on some of these other projects. But just the whole kind of the organization. And in one question, early on, you had that checklist, and you were like on version 18 of the acknowledgments, and you created like a form. And so if I had a budding author, we could probably find a copy of that to provide to them to give them sort of a framework of things that they should be looking at, right?
Yeah, and they could just use it to sort of build their own checklist, that sort of fit their project. It's easy to do, but being systematic, you're going to find it really save you time and as you go down the road. And it also makes you more efficient when you're working with people you're paying.
Well, and then you kind of are keeping track of, have I done this? Have I not done this? And, right. It's just more systematic, and that ends up being a better product.
I think the other thing, we've had a good discussion here about readers and what they like and don't like.
Yeah.
If you're writing a book for someone under 30 years old, if that's your main audience, you may not need a print version. But if you take a look at the printing industry and the buying of books lately, a lot of 30-year-olds don't even buy books. They buy a download. So that's a whole different situation. It's just something I don't, other than I watch my son and how he does things, I don't know a lot about those. I don't know a lot about how those people read and understand, and it's not for me. So I'm really kind of addressing maybe people 50
more
to 70.
Demographic, yeah. So, very definitely. I'm more in the under 3-year-old market right now myself with my granddaughter, but can't help but plug the little darling one more time. So, we've had a great series of programs, Bob, and you've landed us right at the pinnacle to finish off our season. I think that this is an excellent discussion, and we're going to put this online as a resource for people to look at in the future. And because I think as we go back and look at it, as we start working on our own projects, we can start going, oh yeah, this makes a lot more sense to me now, when I look back at it, now that I'm actually got a toe in the water on this project.
Yeah, and feel free to send my email out to individuals if they have questions.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've always been a big help to me, Bob, and I know that I'm not the only one that you benefit. So by all means, future authors, feel free to contact Bob, and I get you his contact information at PNRA, and we'll be glad to help you with any projects that you might have. So do I have anything more? You know, we're 2:15 right now. Do I have anything more for Bob today? Or
Great program, just a great program.
I thought so
Really
too,
learned a
right,
lot.
Roy? Yeah, yeah, I thought it was everybody is coming on board. Well, I I always know that you're a winner for a guest, Bob, you know, because I go on vacation and you're the guest host and you get a higher rating than I do. So
Well, I thought that was a secret, but
yeah, no, it's and you know our this Zoom program we're probably about 800-900 views for this season in the audience, and then online
yeah.
we've had several thousand more views. So you know this stuff gets watched over time, and I want to just you know extend a special thanks to the audience because you know if we didn't have an audience, Bob, you'd just be you and me talking, and it's a lot more fun when we can talk to people and talk about our passions. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of resources here, and the people attending. There's a professional editor in the group. There's people who've done their own books. I mean, a lot of resources you're just watching today.
There you go. Do I have anything more from the house for today's program? Actually, for our summer program, and we're not going to be back again with this program until September 3rd. So anything from the audience? Otherwise, I'm going to move for adjournment. George,
Thank you,
go ahead.
everybody.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Bill Russ what kind of if he's doing a Milwaukee book, if he needs photos. I have some slides. I don't know if there's anything there that would help him, but some views of the Hill engine and possibly a couple of views at Tacoma Junction, things like that.
Thanks, George. The period I'm writing about is the early 1950s, so it's
Okay,
decades before your time.
yeah, a little bit.
When was your dad working for the railroad?
My dad,
Yeah, Bill.
he started in 1937, I believe, as in the roundhouse. He was shoveling sand his first day near the sand tower. Before the war, he got up to hostler. After the war, he was a fireman, and he got everybody at that area got an arbitrary promotion date into locomotive engineer, and his was set back in 1944. There was a lot of dispute over that. Everybody felt they were treated unfairly about their seniority date, but yeah, it's really since World War II up until the shutdown.
Okay, very good. Yeah, well, I'm sure that there's Daniel Cozine. What you got for us?
Well, in the Walt Andrews collection, there is an extensive amount of Milwaukee photographs, and then I don't think it's been inventoried, but shortly before he got ill, he bought a massive Milwaukee negative collection. There's thousands of negatives in it, and I don't think it's been inventoried. So that might be a good source of photographs for you. It's there at the archives.
And,
Very
and,
good.
and Bill, the best person for us to talk to about that would be Aaron, because Aaron is really our, you know, does the most work with our archival collections at you
Yeah,
know.
well, I think the print stuff, it's in the cabinet. I think that's all been inventoried and maybe even scanned. I don't know, but the negative, I don't think anybody's touched. They're supposed to be in order, but I don't think they've been scanned. And it's massive number of them. They go clear back into the 30s.
Is that all in locked storage then, or where is it?
I have no idea where it is for sure, but I believe it's in the lock burrows.
Okay, all right, very good. All righty. Well, it looks like in the shuffle here we've lost Bob, so I didn't get a chance to say goodbye to him. So that's kind of where we're at. You know, for those of you in the audience that aren't on my fall schedule, believe me, I have like Trent, I have a nice long list of people that are down here at the bottom of all the people that I'm planning on you know, having for our spring program too. So, you know, it's a lot of interest, and we're really going to have a good program this fall. Bill Russ, go ahead. Anything, or Daniel Cozine, go ahead. What you got?
Well, I just wondered, does anybody know if the Bowling Club website got unlocked and they can actually use it yet? Does anybody know?
No idea.
No. Okay.
No, no. I didn't know that that was I didn't know that was a
Yeah,
topic.
well, when Bill Kajak died, he had the secret code and nobody else has it. And
That's
it's been
right.
months, and they sent a death certificate in, and it's a club, but they cannot get the internet people to part with it. And Osborne was about ready to throw the towel on it. I just wonder if anybody, know if it got cleared up or not.
Don't know. Don't know.
And
Yeah.
Walt Andrews also bought a large portion of the Warren Wayne collection, so there are just tons of Milwaukee photos in there too.
So Bill, we've got happy hunting in our future as we work on this project. It should be a lot of fun.
And there's a
Yeah,
whole
I'm looking forward to it.
and there's a whole bunch of Milwaukee maps available too if you need that kind of stuff. There's hordes of them.
Yeah, check with Aaron. Aaron's got a pretty good idea of what we've got, especially, Aaron is from kind of the Chehalis Centralia area, so stuff down there on the Milwaukee, he's pretty keen on, and another one of our board members, Rick Bieber, is also pretty knowledgeable about that stuff too.
And some of that's in the joint facility photographs too, the MP joint facility photos.
NP joint facility photographs. I did use one of those courtesy of Chuck Sowell at one of our Frank Sellerhoff presentations this spring. It was kind of an interesting photo. They were being a little snarky about it in the joint facility book, I thought.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Incredible photo. Those are incredible photos. I mean, who walks down miles of industrial spur taking photographs? I mean, it's just incredible.
what Seattle looked like, the waterfront looked like in like the 1920s and 1930s, and it was just a wasteland. All of that area was just bushes, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
all right, folks. Well, all the survivors of this year's program, thank you for your test of endurance, and it's been a pleasure, hosting these programs. And like I say, this program and all the others will be going online. This program will be joining the programs that are already online. And so I'll look forward to hopefully seeing everybody back here on September 3rd when we have Scott Lotus from the Center for Railroad Photography and Art talking about the Feather River Canyon after its tragic forest fire. So until then, this is your host and moderator, Jonathan Fisher, saying so long for now, and I hope everybody has a fantastic summer. Jack, it is great seeing you. Keep up the good work, my friend, okay? And we'll see you guys this fall. So until
Thanks,
then,
Jonathan.
you're welcome, Bill. Look forward to working with you. And thanks,
Thank you.
everybody. And all I can say is bye for now.
Hey, Jonathan, can you hang on?
Yeah, sure.
Stay on for a bit.
Yeah.
I just
Hang on
wanted
here.
to see if we
Let me just do this.